which is the skeptic, a person who laughs at Christianity. Just to set up the outline, I'm going to take a quote from Dallas McCown, who's a well-known atheist, evolutionist. And he says he speaks for many people when he says this. He says, Christianity is scientifically unsupported and probably insupportable, philosophically suspect at best, disreputable at worst, and historically fraudulent. You know, a lot of people believe that. In fact, if you travel in Europe, it's about 5% who don't believe that, actually. Here in South Florida, I'm figuring, you know, there's a lot of people who believe that, especially at the university. I teach at the university setting, and there's kind of this atmosphere that if you believe in God, you need to kind of be quiet about that, because obviously it's, you know, it's just a superstition, and it's a little bit embarrassing about that. And so there's this thing up there. Just to illustrate that, kind of the going attitude. I remember my daughter, when she was in high school, she wanted to do a speech. They're supposed to do a controversial speech. And her speech was going to be on why I believe in God. And the teacher said, oh, we can't have stuff like that, you know. We can't be talking about the Bible. The problem is, she talked about the Bible fairly often in class. She'd say, oh, the myths and legends, oh, it's silly, ridiculous. How could we believe in this kind of stuff? But of course, we can't have some talk about why we might actually want to believe in God. So there's this general atmosphere of intimidation against believers. And I say, no, we should be bold. We should be very, very confident. And people who say stuff like this, what you see on the screen, my response to that is, they don't know what they're talking about. Right. Or if they know what they're talking about, then they're just liars. I think that'd be worse. Another example, I shared this yesterday. And by the way, if you were at one of the talks on Friday night or Saturday night, I asked all the Johns, but one of them, I can't remember which one. I said, can I do something a little bit different this morning? Because, you know, doing the same talk 4 times. So I'm going to sprinkle in stuff about God and science. I'll be part of this talk, but I'm doing other things. So those of you who are there, you know, I'll say a few things the same, but hopefully a few things different. And so go ahead and stay awake. It'll be good. But anyway, so another example I shared last night is I was once in a van with about 8 or 10 other science professors going to a conference, and we're doing our geeky thing, talking about things that, you know, the stuff that you probably wouldn't have understood a word of that conversation. But anyway, and then this lady said, it's Christianity. I don't know how those people believe in that stuff. There, for example, I found out that in the Bible it says, if people wear clothing with more than one material, capital punishment. How ridiculous. And I said, excuse me, but the Bible doesn't say that. And she said, oh, yes, it does. I saw it on a website. There you go. There's a good authority to find out about the Bible. I said, no, actually, it doesn't say that. In fact, you know, I've read the Bible through, I don't know, a dozen, you know, at least 5 or 6 times. I don't know how many times. And people always say there's all these science errors and myths and fables in the Bible. I haven't found one yet. I don't know what they're talking about. I'm thinking they haven't read the Bible. Anyway, it got really quiet in that van. And then I pulled out my Bible. Now, luckily, it was this one, because I can't tell you chapter and verse of the thing with the materials in the Old Testament. All I know is in Leviticus on the right-hand side of the page, so I read it. And I said, I don't know why people say that. I think it's irresponsible. And then we went on from there. Change the subject, of course. And, you know, and so I want you to go from this talk, you know, feeling perhaps a bit less intimidated and perhaps maybe a bit more bold about your faith. Amen. And like I said last night, don't be afraid of bald, smart-looking people with glasses. You know what I'm saying? So I'm just going to go through that outline. And thank you, Dallas McCown, for giving me my outline of my talk here. So he says the Bible is scientifically unsupported and probably insupportable. I want to respond to that. People say, oh, the Bible has all these blatant scientific errors that, you know, if you want to be a scientist and read the Bible, you have to kind of switch your brain off and kind of think in zombie mode or something like that, especially in the Old Testament. And they'll say there's so many blatant science errors in the Bible. And my response to that is, I don't know, I have a PhD in chemistry and physics. I've read it through a few times. I think I would have found one if there was one there. So what are you talking about? Please give me one example. That's my response to that. Now, to give a feel for how this works, and this first part is the part I did last night. The rest will be new stuff. But anyway, this is the Papyrus Ebers. The Papyrus Ebers is kind of like a PDR, Physician's Desk Reference, from the time of Egypt. In other words, It's a compendium of the knowledge about medical science, if you will, in Egypt, from around 1500 BC, which is very significant because that's roughly the same time that Moses probably received the law, which will be relevant as you'll see in a minute. Anyway, let's look at some of the prescriptions in the Papyrus Ebers. Prevent hair from turning gray, anoint it with the blood of a calf, which has been boiled in oil, or with the fat of a rattlesnake. What do you think? I see somebody out there who's not been using that stuff. Okay. All right. Now, I won't pick on him, although I could have for this next one, but I'll pick on myself instead. A mixture of 6 fats, namely those of the horse, the hippopotamus, the crocodile, the cat, the snake, and the ibex to prevent hair loss. What do you think? Now I'm thinking, I don't know about that, because you want to be able to, I guess, be more attractive to the women. I think that's what that's about, right? Women, would you go near a guy wearing that stuff? I don't think so. I don't think it worked. Now, it's kind of funny, but I want to point out that that's actually not funny, really, at all, if you think about it. What's the average lifespan? 25, 30 years old, people were dying of all kinds of diseases, and this is what they had to offer. Now we're going to see a huge distinction with the Bible. Some more ingredients that were used to cure diseases from the Papyrus Ebers: lizard's blood, swine's teeth, putrid meat. Good idea. Let that meat go rotten, and then, I don't know what they were doing with it, putting in their eating some of it, moisture from a pig's ear. Excrement, human excrement as medicine. Now, here's my point. See, people say the Bible is written according to human wisdom. There's no evidence for inspiration. It's just people that wrote some stuff down, and their idea of what's right and what's good, and that's all it is. It's like parents trying to tell their kids what to do. If that were true, then the Bible would have things like this in there. I guarantee you. Because we're going to see there's actually a fair amount of medical type things that are found in the Bible. And I guarantee you, it is a fact that if the Bible was what these people are saying it is, it would have stuff like that in there. And it simply doesn't. Exodus 15:26, I don't know if you ever noticed this passage. It says, God says to his people, if you follow these commands I'm giving you today, I'm not going to bring on you any of the diseases of the people around you. You know, the Jews had a way of always kind of bouncing back. People try to persecute and destroy them. I believe one of the reasons they kept kind of coming back is they lived longer, they had more children. Yeah. Let's look at some examples. Leviticus 11, it says, the pig is unclean. Beef, that's okay. It says, shellfish, lobsters, things like that. Unclean. Fish with scales, no problem. Now, here's an interesting fact. Every, or almost every meat on the you can't eat list is relatively dangerous and causes many, many diseases. And almost every meat on the it's okay to eat list just so happens, maybe it's a coincidence, happens to be relatively safe even if raw. Pork, as you know, trichinosis, in fact, there's something like 20-something diseases that are known to be carried by pork meat. Now, in the market, with reasonably good sanitary conditions, etc., I still say cook your pork all the way through, though. Beef, even raw. Oh yes, even raw. In fact, I was sharing just yesterday, I was in Venezuela the summer before last, and I kind of pointed on the menu. I read Spanish, but I just couldn't, I didn't know what the stuff meant. So, and they brought out a plate of raw beef. That was my dinner. And I'm thinking, okay, Leviticus 11, we're good to go here. And again, I'm sure you're aware that clams, oysters, all these things carry many, many diseases. But the thing is, all the people around Israel were eating all these things. And of course, dying right and left, not realizing the cause. The Jews did it, and to the extent that they did what God said, they were sick. So, and fish, as you know, sushi, raw fish, safe. I was in Davao in the Philippines just a couple weeks ago, and they served this big bowl of raw tuna salad. I'm thinking, by the way, it tasted fantastic. But knowing that it's safe, I was thinking that was pretty good. Now, here's some examples of writings from Hebrew writers that would relate possibly to scientific knowledge and kind of show what would have been in the Bible if it were not for the fact that the Bible is inspired by God. So I'm not going to read them all, I'll just read the last one. The gnat people creature, taking in food but never secreting it. Let's stop there. Here's a scientific claim. It's that flies don't have poop. Okay? That's funny. Okay, you're supposed to. That's funny, you know. Because, you know, is that true? Is that true? No. I mean, obviously we know. I've never actually looked at it under a microscope, but I assume actually that they do. So there's a science error right there. And the point is, there's nothing, never. Look, I challenge anybody, any atheist, any skeptic, find something like that anywhere in the Bible. You won't. Period. Here's something from the Jews. Anyway, they said you take the gnats, you crush them up, smear it on the snake bite. There you go. That'll take care of that poison. Okay. Now, instead we have the Bible. Whoever touches a dead body is unclean for 7 days. Must purify himself with water on the 3rd day. Mixed with the ash from the red heifer sacrifice, hyssop, sprinkle everything with that stuff. Now, that seems a bit cruel at first. You know, why would God tell His people to not touch a dead body? Or, I'm sorry, if they do touch a dead body, they're unclean. Seems like the people who help out with the funeral, you know, that's a loving thing, and then they have to be separate. It seems kind of mean. Well, actually, if you understand a little bit about what we call germ theory, it makes a lot of sense. Ignaz Semmelweis discovered this in the 1840s. He's working in a women's hospital, and in the women's hospital he's working, and the death rate was 18%, more than 1 out of 6. That's why women didn't have children in the hospital back then. Not because they couldn't afford to go to the hospital, but because they couldn't afford to have the doctor to their home, where it was far safer. Semmelweis noticed that what the doctors were doing was going down and examining the bodies of the women who died the day before, doing the autopsies, and then proceeding straight up to the hospital ward and starting their gynecological exams. See, they didn't know about germ theory. Now, it's interesting. Let me point this out. God didn't say why. He just said, don't do it. That's all He said. So Semmelweis says, when you touch a dead body, you're unclean. Wash yourself carefully with soap and water. Death rate went down to 3%. Now the Bible also says women who give birth or in their period are unclean. That sounds like anti-women stuff. You know, it's God hating women, right? No. It was God's love and mercy for women and for their children and for their husbands. Because think about it. Think about how many thousands of women's lives were saved by that. So Semmelweis says, if you touch a woman, you know, and the blood and all that, you're unclean. By the way, it was puerperal fever, that's what they called it. And some people said it was because of the alignment of the planets. Other people said it was because of bad air. They called it the effluvia theory. Other doctors said it's because the women are hysterical. Typical male attitude there. Anyway, so Semmelweis says, every time you touch a female patient, you have to wash your hands with soap and water. The death rate fell down to 0.5%. Just 2 simple biblical admonitions following that went from 18% to less than 0.5%. You'd think it would have been a hero, wouldn't you? No, actually the doctors rebelled, they refused to do it, they fired him, he died of a blood infection not long afterward. Now, the formula was water, ashes from the red heifer sacrifice, and hyssop. Now hyssop is a plant in the thyme family, and it's got a lot of oil in there, and if you mix the oil from the hyssop and the ash and the water, you're making kind of soap. But it's interesting, hyssop has this compound, it's called thymol, and when I teach organic chemistry, one of the functional groups is a phenol, and the first thing I teach about phenols is that's the class of compounds which are antiseptics. In other words, the most powerful germ-killing but non-poisonous class of substances is phenols. So the prescription, if you touch a dead body, is to wash yourself thoroughly with a powerful antibacterial soap. Now, the way I see this, just got lucky, or the Bible's inspired by God. And after we have a few examples, this claim that the Bible is scientifically unsupported and insupportable, seems to me it starts to go away. I have some other examples I gave them yesterday in the class. I'm just going to give one more. Circumcision on the 8th day. Why circumcision? That seems kind of barbaric, doesn't it? This barbaric practice. All right, let's think about this. Remember, most people, until about 150 years ago, most people who died of infectious disease. That's what killed most people. We're talking about fungus and bacteria. Now, where is the fungus and bacteria like to grow if they thrive in warm, dark, wet places? Now, forgive me for this, but where's the warmest, darkest, wettest place on a guy? All right, we're moving along here. And think about it. Seriously, think about it. All kinds of venereal disease and other kinds of diseases. And by the way, even AIDS, 60% reduction in the spread of AIDS. Of course, there's other ways to prevent it that are nice, Christian ways to prevent it. But even for those who choose not to, 60% reduction simply by circumcision. But why circumcision on the 8th day? That's the part that's hard to take. Why the 8th day? Now, the 3rd day, that would have made sense. The number 3, the number of God, because they were into numerology, and there's Hebrew numerology. The 7th day, that would have made sense. Why the 8th day? I can't think of any reason the Jews would have picked the 8th day. Actually, as a scientist, I think I know why. Now, again, I can't prove that this is why God did it. All I can say is I see scientific wisdom, and these supposed errors and mistakes, they're just not there. 1 + 1 is 2. That's how it works for me. So anyway, I don't know if you knew this, but when children are born, they have no vitamin K. The reason is we don't produce vitamin K. Our bodies do not produce vitamin K. And it cannot pass through the placenta from mom to kid. So when a kid's born, they have no vitamin K. Vitamin K is essential for blood clotting. So therefore, when a child is born, if they're cut, they could bleed out very, very easily. And by the way, I'm proud of this church for putting on a blood drive, speaking of blood. I was really proud to see that coming in. That's a great example. And anyway, so anyway, the vitamin K is required for producing prothrombin. A child does have some prothrombin when they're born. It drops to very, very low levels. And then once they start producing vitamin K, which, by the way, is produced by bacteria in your large intestine. The kids get bacteria the first time they eat from their mom, and within about 3 or 4 days, vitamin K level goes up, prothrombin level goes up to a very high level, and then it drops back down to the normal level. Now, I'm going to show you a graph of prothrombin level versus time for a child. Okay? Now, guess what? And I didn't make this up. This is from the scientific literature. Guess what the safest day, from the day they're born to the day they die, guess what the safest day is to circumcise a male child? Okay? Now, how did Abraham know that? Now, here's how he knew it. By the way, this is a joke. This is a joke, okay? See, what he did was he did a carefully controlled double-blind experiment. You see that? Get the idea? And what he noticed is, the 9th day, that's looking good. We're going to go for somewhere between the 7th and the 9th day. All right? And speaking of blood, I could have talked about the fact that the Bible says the life is in the blood. Medical science says the disease is in the blood. That's why they did bloodletting. Guess who was right on that one? Those of you giving blood are giving life in many ways. And people say the Bible's full of all these scientific errors, and it's funny because the Bible says that the universe was created out of nothing. That's Hebrews 11:3. From things that are unseen to things that are seen were made. Science finally came around to that one. And even the scientific wisdom of Genesis chapter 1, which gives in an outline form basically what we know to be true from science. So to those who say the Bible is unsupportable from science, I say, really? Can you please give me an example? All right, the next one, of course, Dulles McCown said, Christianity is bogus philosophy. What philosopher can ever believe in Christianity? I say, well, what are your alternatives? I teach, I'm at the university level, and the philosophies that kind of get batted around the most are scientific materialism, all right? Scientific materialism and postmodernism. And I'm thinking, forgive me for saying this, but if you think scientific materialism is better philosophy than Christian philosophy, I completely disagree with that. I want to talk about that. By the way, my talk has absolutely nothing to do with Socrates. He's just a philosopher, and I just put that out there. Okay? So I just want to talk about that. I want to be honest. By the way, the name for Christian philosophy, I guess, is theology. Okay? So I would challenge anybody who says that postmodernism is a better philosophy than the Christian philosophy. I think that's nonsense. I believe Christian philosophy gives a much more realistic description of the world as it actually is than either postmodernism or materialism. For example, scientific materialism, otherwise known as naturalism, denies the existence of truth, denies the existence of morality and value. Because if scientific materialism is true, then your value is the value of the chemicals that you're made up out of. I don't know about you, but I think I have value. It's not just because I'm in a fantasy. My heart, everything tells me that human beings have a special value, different from snails and cockroaches. Wow. Postmodernism says that all things are true, either that or nothing is true. It's just, if it's true for you, it's true for me. Now, I say, if you say it's not true that if you jump off a cliff, you'll fall, and I say that it is true that if you jump off a cliff, you'll fall, I say that I'm right and you're wrong. And if you want to go by that philosophy, it's a dangerous philosophy. So materialism is the belief that the only reliable instrument for discovering what's true is the scientific method. Therefore, there's no ethics, no morality. The supernatural certainly is not real. That means that Jesus was not raised from the dead, and life was created as just an accidental event. I talked about that extensively last night. And then there's no consciousness. For example, you say, I want to go. If the materialist is right, that's a meaningless concept. Because I think you assume that you are a person, that you exist separate from the chemicals, that you are more than chemicals. But if the materialist is right, that's all you are, is chemicals. So when you say to your spouse, I love you, it's just your endorphins and your chemicals moving around, your neurons firing, and that's all it is. It's just the way your brain fires. And I think God is love. Come on. But if the naturalist is right, that's nonsense. That's a meaningless statement. All right, as a statement of this, Richard Dawkins says, in the universe of blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, others are going to get lucky. You won't find any rhyme or reason, no justice. See, under scientific materialism, justice has no meaning. Human rights, what's the source of human rights? It's just a matter of opinion. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we expect if there is at the bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, and no good. So according to Dawkins, there's no such thing as evil. Pol Pot, Idi Amin, I believe in evil. How about you? Amen. In fact, according to Richard Dawkins, about the only thing that's evil is to force your religion on somebody else. But that's Richard Dawkins. He's a very angry man. If the materialist is right, then religious thought is absolute nonsense. And when you pray, it's just sort of chemicals moving around in some place near your amygdala or something like that. Human rights has no basis. If the naturalist is right, then good and evil are meaningless ideas. Stealing is not wrong. In fact, it might be good. Because if there's any purpose, according to naturalism, the purpose is for you to perpetuate your genes. And anything that results in that would, by definition, I suppose, be good. So, killing of somebody that might actually not necessarily be a bad thing. Now, by the way, most atheists that I met are really nice people. I'm not trying to say they're terrible, immoral, horrible people. I'm just saying their philosophy is dangerous. And it's not good philosophy. That's what I'm saying. I'm not accusing them all of being evil people. Some of my best friends, I bump into them all the time. I'm a science professor, you know what I'm saying? I like some of them a lot. But their philosophy stinks, in my opinion. Because, really, racism is acceptable. Because it's all genetics. And by the way, I've never met a racist atheist yet, so I don't mean to imply something that's not true. But their philosophy, because, see, if you do something evil as a Christian, the thing you say you believe in says it's wrong. But if you do something evil as an atheist, or as a naturalist, nothing about your philosophy says that it's wrong necessarily. All right? And postmodernism, I don't want to get into the whole postmodernism thing, but basically what it says is there's no truth. You know, if you say it's true, that's fine. If somebody else says it's true, so Hitler says this is true, or, whatever anybody says is true. If that's true, then, you say that any kind of sexual activity with anybody you want, it's, you don't like that, that's fine, but it's okay with me. It's all just fine. Everything's good. I'm okay, you're okay, we're all okay. Now, that's a reference to a 70s book. Remember that book, I'm okay, you're okay? And then there's no rational way to discover what's true. But if that's true, then how do you explain the fact that science works? They'll say, well, science, that's just one viewpoint, and it's based on, it's just based on some assumptions and all this kind of stuff. Well, I say, actually, we got to the moon and get back. It seems to work pretty well. Now, if you accept postmodernism, or even if you accept naturalism, then you're going to have to acknowledge that Christianity is the source of some things that you actually value a lot. If it were not for Christianity, I believe we would not have women's rights. I mean, look at every ancient culture and then look at Jesus. In fact, human rights. Where did human rights come from? John Locke, who basically, in some sense, invented the whole idea of human rights. He was a Christian philosopher. Because Christians believe in the value of the individual person. Christian philosophy says you are valuable. Where's your value under postmodernism or naturalism? And abolition of slavery, we all know that. You saw the movie, right? We finally gave credit to those Christians who abolished slavery. Amen. And by the way, as I mentioned last night, if it were not for Christianity, we would not have science either. That wouldn't even exist. I don't have time to explain that. So the Christian philosophy is much better. Christian philosophy is realism, but naturalism. In other words, the world is real, but it's not the only thing there is. I find that to be true. In fact, if you read Genesis 1:1, Genesis 1:1 defeats pantheism, atheism, dualism, materialism, humanism, animism, and every other ism there is, except God, the one God who created us and gave us a reason and a purpose to live. And Genesis says the world is good. The Bible, Christian theology, answers the question that so many people struggle with is, why is there evil in the world? Now, the naturalist says there's no such thing as evil. That does not solve any problem. The Bible says the world, the physical world is good. Hinduism, Greek religion, they say the world is bad. The Bible says the world is good. The problem is sin. And that we rebelled against God. So biblical theology solves the problem of good and evil. Now, I want to get to the third one because I'm using up a bit too much time. So he said, Christianity is historically fraudulent. I mean, everybody knows. It's just a bunch of stories. A bunch of Jewish teachers that wanted to make sure their kids were good, so they said stuff about Daniel and the lion's den, and, you know, the whole thing about Sodom and Gomorrah. Watch out, remember Sodom and Gomorrah? It's fables people made up. And people say this with great confidence, laughing at you. I'm telling you, they're laughing at you. And, you know, I want to be respectful, and so let's not laugh back at them. That's not good. All right? But actually, the reason they're saying that is because they're just plain ignorant. Right. They may have letters after their name, and they may, you know, get on Oprah or whatever, but the reason they say that is because they don't know what they're talking about. The skeptics of Christianity said there's no such thing as the Hittites. The Hittites are mentioned, I don't know, I haven't looked at my notes for a while. I don't know how many times they're mentioned, like 47 times. There we go, 47 times. People said there's no such thing as the Hittites. Hittites, who are they? And then in 1906, Hugo Winkler discovered Hattusha. It's a fairly large city. There are the ruins. Here are the gates to the city that doesn't exist, that's occupied by people who never lived and spoke a language that was never spoken. In fact, you can actually major in the Hittite language now. Now, here's the point. You know, what these critics, they do, say the Bible's wrong, this is a fantasy, this is a fable. You prove that one right, then when they stop mentioning that, and they say, well, this one here, and you find some evidence for that. Oh, they just move. So they're always shifting and moving around. I'm very suspicious of that. Because they have this presupposition which doesn't agree with the facts, and their range of things they can use as examples keep getting smaller, but they don't change their story. I'm suspicious of people like that. For example, there's the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. And people say, you know, that's just a fantasy, you know, again, just trying to get people to behave or whatever. Now, the Bible describes 5 cities in the plain there. And then archaeologists went there a few years ago, and there's a bunch of these wadis, these dry river basins that go into the area around the Dead Sea. The area is perhaps the most desolate area in the entire world. Nobody lives there. Completely desolate. But then they started digging around, and in some of these wadis, they found the remnants of cities. In fact, evidence of a lot of agriculture. In fact, very similar to what you see when Lot was there in Sodom and Gomorrah. A very vigorous kind of agriculture. Guess how many cities they found? 5 cities. In fact, all 5 cities were burned and never ever reoccupied right around 2100 BC. Now as the Christian, you go, oh, I'm not surprised about that at all. But the person who says the Bible's full of historical errors and historically fraudulent, what do they have to say about that? In fact, the largest of the cities, which is, let me see if I can find my pointer. Well, anyway, the one on the upper right there, Badabdura, something like that, largest of the cities, it had 7 feet of ashes. And there was a cemetery about a mile outside the city, and when they went there, they had these little cemetery buildings, and they were burned from the top to the bottom. Generally, when you burn a city down, you burn from the bottom to the top. They were burned from the top to the bottom. You know what we have here? Physical evidence of a biblical miracle. I think that's pretty cool. The Chaldean inscription. Again, these people say, they say David, Goliath. Now, I can't prove to you that David killed Goliath. I don't know if you have the little round stone with some blood and we can do some genetic testing there. I can't prove to you that David killed Goliath, but they would say David himself, there's no such person. And it's just a story that they made up. And then in the 1980s, they discovered the Chaldean inscription. In fact, a friend of mine, an archaeologist, John Wilson, was in Dan that day, and he walked by that stone that day. He said if the sun had been at a different angle, he would have been the discoverer. Anyway, let me read what that Chaldean inscription says. I don't read Aramaic. I can't read that, but it says this. Yeah, if I can find it, I have to find the right page. Sorry about that. It says, I, Hazael, killed Joram, the son of Omri, and I defeated Ahaziah of the house of David. So what we have here is physical proof that not only that David was a king, but they set up a line of kings that succeeded him. The house of David was very real. And he says, I killed Joram. Now the problem is, in First Kings, we find out that he didn't kill him. He wounded him. And then Jehu killed him a few days later. Now here's my point. Which is more believable, the Chaldean inscription or the biblical account? That's an easy question. That's a very easy question. Anybody who studied the Bible knows that obviously the biblical account is far more reliable than the Chaldean inscription. To say differently means you haven't read the Bible, you don't know your archaeology. Right. And they would say that that Pilate never lived. This is Tiberius Pilatus Procuratus, or whatever. So I think the guy actually did exist, and I think he really was procurator of Judea. One of my favorites is Daniel. In Daniel 6 is the story of the writing on the wall. Sorry, Daniel 5, the writing on the wall. And there's an interesting thing there. In the writing on the wall, it mentions this king, Belshazzar. Now, all the archaeologists, all the historians said there was no such guy. I mean, whoever wrote Daniel was writing this nice little fable to make people behave well or whatever. And so he made up this guy Belshazzar because Herodotus doesn't mention Belshazzar. Herodotus says the last king was Nabonidus. And all the other historians, they don't even mention Belshazzar. So obviously there's no Belshazzar, and just another example of those silly Christians believe in this fable. And then recently at the Ziggurat in Ur, that's where Abraham was from, they found an inscription. And of course, it mentions Belshazzar. Belshazzar was the son of Nabonidus. What happened is Nabonidus, when he became king of Babylon, he was into mysticism, and he was interested in worshiping Sin, which was the name of the moon god. And so he went out to the desert of Pella, and he was a Taman rather, and he spent his whole time out there, barely paid any attention. So guess who he appointed as regent king? Belshazzar. Now there's a thing in Daniel 5 you might not have noticed. Belshazzar offered to Daniel the 3rd place in the kingdom. Did you ever notice that? The 3rd place in the kingdom. Why the 3rd place in the kingdom? Because Belshazzar had the 2nd place in the kingdom. His father was the 1st. And see, people say, oh, people made up this story. But by the time that they're saying Daniel was written in the 2nd century BC, that was after Herodotus. The knowledge about this guy, Belshazzar, had completely disappeared. So how would the writer of Daniel have made that one up? And I could go on and on and on. But those who claim the Bible is historically fraudulent, that's just a bogus claim. Then they'll say the Bible has myths. You know what? It's true. The Bible has myths. but it has true myths. It has true myths. It's a bit different to have a true myth than a myth. You know, our idea of a myth is these gods are throwing out their bolts of lightning, and these guys are flying around, and you know, the mud gets turned into an eagle and it flies. That's the kind of stuff. There are creation myths. Almost every culture has a creation myth. You can read them all. You could read Poplovo, you could read the Gilgamesh epic, the Near Eastern mystery religions, all these creation accounts, and they all have these things that are like, you know, nobody can take them seriously. And then there's the creation myth, in quotes in the Bible, which describes that the universe began in the flesh of light, describes life appearing first in the oceans, then on land, all these things. In fact, there's no God doing these things and having these battles and getting angry at each other, and then just by accident people get created, all this kind of stuff. So the cool thing is, the Bible has a creation myth. It's just, it happens to be the true one. And here's how I think about this. I think God gave us some innate knowledge. And one thing that most people just sort of understand is that we were created by God. And so they make up these myths to kind of express that knowledge that they have. Now there's another myth that's found almost everywhere in the world. It's called the God-man myth. It's the myth that God became man. And the Bible has a God-man myth too, doesn't it? His name is Jesus. Now we can talk about Krishna. That's the Hindu God-man. Now Krishna, where did he live? Right? Who were his parents? What part of the country did he live in? What did he do for a living? Krishna is not a real person. It's just a myth. But I think human beings just have this innate understanding that God wanted to come and become, so that he could fellowship with us. So they make up this myth. And there's the Horus myth, and there's the Bacchanalia, which is the Greek version of this God-man myth. And all these are these people who have these weird properties, and we don't know where they came from. We don't know where they live. We don't know, we don't know their parents. We don't know their children. We don't know anything about them, other than we're just supposed to accept it. And then there's this one God-man myth about this guy. We know who his parents were. We know his close associates. We know the town where he was born. We know where he died. We know where he lived. We have written eyewitness testimony of dozens of people who actually saw him. Historians didn't even believe in him, say where he came from and where he died. And we know that he was raised from the dead. Why? Because we have 500 eyewitnesses to the fact. He didn't do miracles off in the corner. He raised Lazarus, who had been in the tomb and smelled very, very badly on the fourth day in front of hundreds of eyewitnesses. Wow. Even those who didn't believe in him couldn't deny the miracle. In fact, they didn't kill him because he was claiming to do miracles. They killed him because he was working miracles. Right. So sure, we got a myth. We have the God-man myth about the real God, the real man who was God. Right. The last point I'm going to make, and we could talk about some of these other interesting myths, creation myths, and all those things. The last thing I want to point out is people say, oh, the Bible's full of all these contradictions. I mean, how can anybody take it seriously? Because, it seems like the Bible writers, they should have had a little conference here to discuss this stuff, because it's very confusing. You've heard this before, right? The Bible, you can prove anything from the Bible, and the Bible's full of contradictions. Now, I've got a website, and I get a lot of questions, but the most common question I get is, how do you explain the fact that the Bible says this, and it also says that? How do you explain that? And my response is, in virtually every case, just read the Scripture, read it in context, use a little bit of common sense, and maybe give the Bible at least a shred of benefit of the doubt, and then these things go away. I'm not saying, because I'll be honest with you, when I read the Bible, I find inherent contradictions myself. And what I've learned is, when you see things that might at first glance appear to contradict, when you understand how they're both true, for example, we're saved by grace, but we also have works involved. When you understand how they work together, you have a deeper understanding, not only of God, but of reality as we know it. Let me give you a few examples. For example, Genesis 7:17. It says the flood lasted over only 40 days. But Genesis 8:3 says it lasted 150 days. There you go. Now, what they'll say is there were two different writers of Genesis. The two writers, they had two different myths. They were drawing from two different myths. etc. Don't believe that nonsense. That is nonsense. Because it rained for 40 days, and the waters went up for 150 days, and then they began to decrease. Common sense. Well, that was a tough one. All right. Genesis 37:36, it says, Joseph was sold as a slave to the Midianites, but in Genesis 39:1, it says he was sold as a slave to the Ishmaelites. All right? And again, people, you hear all this skeptical stuff. They say, you know, the Genesis had all these different writers, and they're all completely disagreeing, completely contradict. And they, believe me, I get this stuff all the time. All right, now, I might ask you a question. Are you an American or a Floridian? Which are you? I caught you yesterday saying you're a Floridian, but 3 months ago you said you're American. You're a liar. Because it turns out that a Midianite is an Ishmaelite. Amen. Just like you could be a Benjamite and an Israelite. Same thing. That's your contradiction? This is your evidence that the Bible has contradictions? Matthew 27:5. Matthew 27:5, it says that Judas threw the money to the temple and went and hanged himself. But Acts 1:18 says he fell headlong and his body burst open. There you go. And I get these all the time. Right now, I don't know. I think this is what happened. Judas went out and he hanged himself. His body was hanging there for a few days. And do you know what happened to a body in a warm climate hanging there for a few days by a rope? Can you kind of imagine what might happen? Become very, very bloated, and when they cut it down, can you imagine what happened? His body burst open. There's so many examples like this. John 19:17, it says Jesus carried his own cross. In Mark 15, it says Simon carried his cross. That's a contradiction. I'm telling you, because I go to these websites and I see this stuff, and I get these questions. By the way, sometimes I get them from honest, open Christians who just want to know how it works. Don't be afraid to ask these questions. That's exactly what you need to do. Now let me do one more example. This one's a more serious example. In Exodus 20, verse 4 and 5, it says that God will bring the punishment of the father's sins on his children and his grandchildren and even his great-grandchildren. That's kind of disturbing teaching, isn't it? That doesn't seem fair. And then in Ezekiel 18 it says, the son will not share the guilt of the father, and the father will not share the guilt of the son. Now that's a harder one. It's a harder one. So which is it? Yes, we are responsible for the sin of others, or no, we're not? I think you know the correct answer. And the way to study the Bible is to start with the more basic truth and then interpret the other ones in light of that. And as a Christian, we know the fundamental truth is, before God, we're responsible for our sin. So people are into original sin. That's just false teaching. That is not God. That is not the Bible. So how do we understand this? All right. Well, because I believe that Exodus 24 through 5 is talking about the physical consequences of sin. Now, if a man abuses his wife, who suffers? The man suffers. The wife suffers. The children suffer, and you know what happens. You know how it goes. Now, I believe in Christianity we have hope. But you know what? If you as a Christian were abused sexually or physically as a child, do you think that has even implications even for your own children? I believe it does. But I believe it can end there. But I believe it really, in Exodus 24 through 5, God's saying, look, if you sin, people will suffer. To me, that's a good reason to not sin. It makes me not want to sin. So I think Exodus 24 through 5 is talking about the physical consequences that inevitably come when people sin. And God took revenge on whole nations, correct? But physical harm is not evil. Because when we die, we will go to be with God. And of course, Ezekiel 18 is saying, look, that you are responsible for God only for your own sin. So let me summarize. Oh yeah, and I was going to talk about the fact that somebody changed the Bible and you can't trust it because it got changed. And we could talk about all that, but I'm out of time here. There's a group there in Dade County. I guess they have to get out of the building there. So I'm going to skip that. This will all be up at my website. I'll just give you the very quick version. Those who say that the Bible got changed by Constantine, the facts say this. The Greek New Testament we have is the exact version of the original virtually exact version of the original. We know that because we have manuscripts from as late as 50 years after the original. We have tens of thousands of manuscripts. In fact, the quotes from the New Testament from the 2nd and 3rd century, you could put together virtually the entire New Testament from that, and that's before Constantine was even born. Amen. This is nonsense. You know, the Da Vinci Code, all that, it's nonsense. Doesn't make any sense. That is ignorance. Okay? Amen. So to summarize all this, the Bible is consistent with what we know from science. Biblical philosophy solves the human problem as no other philosophy. I didn't mention every philosophy. I've studied most of them. Christian philosophy is the best philosophy because it's real. And it answers the questions that we care about. The Bible is the most accurate history of the ancient world. By far, there's no comparison. Don't listen to that nonsense. It is nonsense. It's coming from people who have an agenda. And that is not a godly agenda. The Bible has myths, it's true. It's really cool. It's got the true myths. The one that other religions wish they had. The Bible has no contradictions. And when you think it does, it's just you need to study it a bit more deeply. Amen. And we have the faithfully preserved Word of God. Now let me make one last comment. I'm going to skip all but Hebrews 11:1. Hebrews 11:1 says that faith is belief in things that are unseen. You know, and I'm talking about apologetics. I'm giving you some reasons for belief, but you know what? In the end, it's not about apologetics. It's not about facts. It's not about evidence. It's about your faith in God. Right. Because ultimately, the faith that God honors is the faith in things that can't be seen. You know, you can't see that God is in control. But as a Christian, you have to believe that God is in control. Right. You can't see your salvation. You know, and I can give you evidence the Bible is inspired by God, but I can't give you physical evidence that you're saved. So let apologetics deepen your faith so you can do something with it. Because if all you do is just taking this stuff and really go, oh, those stupid atheists, I can't believe how ignorant they are, and all those other people, if that's all you do with it, that's empty, that's vain. No, faith is belief in things unseen. Faith is a belief that someday you'll be raised from the dead. Amen. I can't prove that to you, but I know it's true. You know why I know it's true? Because Jesus said it. Amen. He was raised from the dead. I think he should know. He's been there. He's done that. So don't just fill your head with apologetics and all this kind of knowledge. If you don't do something with it, it's like the guy who looks in the mirror in James chapter 2, right? Do what it says. Don't just believe it's true. Do what it says. In fact, let it inspire you to do amazing, amazing things with your life. Because God is real. God loves you. And God wants you to have an amazing life. Amen. So let's take this faith. Let's share it. Let's tell our people. Let's be confident. Let's be bold on campus. Amen, students?
Amen.
But don't just be bold. Understand that God is in control. Your life is in God's hands. And someday you will shine like the stars in the heavens forever. Thank you.